Hello and good morning, everyone. This is Nigel Mbayek from KETIV Technologies. Today we're going to be, as usual, every Thursday morning we got our KETIV AVA, so our Autodesk Virtual Academy. I'd like to welcome everyone who's a returning member and everyone who's new. Definitely welcome to the party, and hopefully we'll have a good session today. We've got Thomas Fitzgerald on the line as well. Thomas, how's it going?
It's going very well. How you doing, Nigel?
Yeah. Good, good. So for anyone who doesn't know or doesn't recognize Thomas's voice, we've worked with Thomas for a few months now with numerous webcasts, all relating to automation and iLogic in general, right? So this is our fifth webcast. Correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas.
That is correct. Fifth, yeah.
Nice. So you know, if you want to catch up on the previous four, they're on our YouTube channel. That's going to be ketiv.com or youtube.com/KETIV Technologies. I always get that mixed up. So definitely, Thomas, if you want to give us a little bit of background on what you're going to be showing today, go for it.
So yes, so today we're going into the fifth part of these webinars where we're going to be discussing putting together user interfaces and why they're important and some of the different methods that we can follow in order to develop our user interfaces.
Awesome, yeah, and so definitely expect to be here for anywhere between 35 minutes and an hour. Sometimes we get super deep into these, and it could take a little longer than expected. But definitely, if you do have any questions, feel free to post them in the GoToWebinar chat panel at any time. We'll go ahead and answer those for you. And make sure that you do fill out that session survey at the end. It helps us kind of plan for future webcasts. And if we need to reach out to you in regards to any help you may need, that's probably one of the easiest ways to do so. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Thomas. We'll go ahead and get started, and we'll see you at the end of this.
All right, thank you, Nigel. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So yes, as stated earlier, Design Automation for iLogic, Part 5, where we're discussing user interfaces. So the whole purpose of all these different webinars was to give us a better understanding as to all the different aspects that are involved when planning and implementing some level of design automation within your company. So a lot of the different variables and the details might be different from location to location, business to business, but the principles are all basically the same. So before we get going, it's my name, Thomas Fitzgerald. I'm an Autodesk implementation consultant, been with Autodesk for 6 years now. I'm also an iLogic expert, consultant, trainer. I've been working with iLogic for nearly 8 years now, ever since its inception and ever since Autodesk had acquired that technology. I'm located out of Phoenix, Arizona, but I travel all over North America and Europe doing different engagements, working with both Inventor, iLogic, and Inventor Automation. So the goal of these webinars was to kind of discuss and demonstrate the different aspects involved with design automation. Our earlier webinars covered model development, working with data sources, i.e. Excel spreadsheets, SQL databases. The last webinar that we conducted was pertaining to developing logic, be it iLogic code or developing code utilizing the Inventor API. So this webinar will be about user interfaces and user input. How do we communicate with the users to do certain things? So as the last bullet point there states, developing user interfaces in Inventor and Microsoft Visual Studio. So stay tuned for that. In previous webinars, I discussed this workflow. I developed this workflow kind of showing from a visual perspective the different aspects. So, as stated earlier, working with configuration data sources, building the different logic, using Inventor as the engine that kind of ties all this together. The Inventor library, which comprises of IPTs, IAMs, IDWs, DWGs for those that use DWG for their 2D file formats. And in the little black areas there, that's kind of future stuff, working with Vault through this process. There's a lot of companies out there that have Inventor implemented, and they use it on a regular basis and have found the value of coupling that with Vault in order to maintain an accurate and consistent work stream of inventor information. So today, kind of pulling it all together and being able to work with UIs in order to trigger and initiate all these different processes that we've developed and all these different aspects that we've linked together here. So user interfaces. What is a user interface? You know, basically a user interface is a means for us to be able to ask questions from the end users. So with automation, there's only so much that we can predict. And that's the whole point of automation, is to create processes, code, things along that line that take care of those repetitive tasks, those things that can be predicted, the mundane, repetitive things that our end users have to go through. You know, our designers, our engineers, you know, we as a company, when we want to create and work with our engineering departments, we, you know, there's a lot of very skilled, intelligent individuals that get paid a lot of money to do something within the company, to contribute. And there's a lot of companies that, you know, these end users are doing things that, you know, maybe other individuals with lesser skills or interns can take care of. You know, there's no reason why our engineers that are getting paid, you know, tens of thousands of dollars every year have to do things like data entry and manual formatting of different things, or piecing things together within a 3D environment that are predictable. We understand how they go, and they go together the same way every single time. So develop automation in order to handle those tasks. However, regardless of how predictable these processes might be, or these configurations, there are certain times when we're going to need input from the end user. A human being is the ultimate deciding factor on certain things. So UIs are a means for us to allow the end user to make those decisions, or to give some sort of input or feedback. So what do we want to entail within our user interfaces? Well, obviously we want to present our end users with the information that is important. You know, we want to be able to get these questions answered in an accurate and a consistent fashion. So understanding what the needs of the automation are, and then be able to put that into a UI in order to ultimately get these decisions made, and then of course lastly to then trigger that automation process. So there's a couple of different ways that we can create UIs within Inventor. We can use iLogic. Inside of Inventor, we have the capability to develop iLogic rules, and along with that, we can go ahead and create different iLogic forms, which I'll be demonstrating here momentarily. But here are some of the benefits and some of the characteristics of iLogic forms. They're very simple in terms of their functionality. However, they don't provide an abundance of different tools for us to be able to ask these questions and get this feedback from our end users. One of the pros is it's built right inside of Inventor. So if you have Inventor, you have a means to develop forms for your logic in a very simple and most importantly, a free way of acquiring that. You don't have to go and purchase any additional software. You don't have to go through any additional training in order to understand how to work with iLogic forms. They're very, very straightforward, very simplistic. One of the cons to iLogic forms, however, is the fact that typically they're stored within the files themselves. Even if they're external forms, they're still exposed to the end user. So an end user could potentially have a means to modify or change the form depending on how it's developed and where it might be stored. Another way to create a form is by using Visual Studio, Microsoft Visual Studio. Some of the pros involved with Visual Studio is the fact that there's a large number of tools available. So we can develop our user interfaces in a very robust and extended type of way, where we have a large number of tools in order to create different formats with our forms. We can create multiple windows, different tabs, different pick boxes, radio buttons, check boxes, all sorts of different ways in order to ask these questions of our end users. When we do create Windows forms using Visual Studio, we have to compile that information in the form of a DLL. And inside of Inventor, there's different things that we can configure in order to reference those DLLs and use them to present our Windows form, which I'll be demonstrating as well. There's one last thing that we can do that kind of piggybacks with developing Windows UIs inside of Visual Studio, and that's the capability of being able to create an add-in. And I'll explain the difference here in a little bit, but both of those, we work inside of Visual Studio. We compile and build our projects in a way that we produce a DLL, and then there's other ways that within that Visual Studio project where we can create it as an add-in. One of the pros, serious pros about Visual Studio, using Visual Studio for our Windows forms, is the fact that the DLLs aren't exposed to the end users, the add-ins aren't exposed to the end users, so it's a much more secure way of developing this information, so that way it doesn't get manipulated. Only those individuals with permissions and credentials can go in there and make the changes as necessary. So a more secure way of storing and hosting your UIs. So with that being said, let's take a look at Inventor and some of the examples that I have here pertaining to Windows, or pertaining to different UIs. So I've used this example throughout the webinars, my TLS assembly template here that shows a lot of the different aspects. So if you're familiar with Inventor 2018 primarily, in our model browser here on the left side, we have the capability where new functionality has been added, kind of just for aesthetics and usability, where we don't have different browsers now for our models and assemblies and iLogic. They're kind of integrated, well, they are integrated into the same browser. So if you want to use the model information, so we can look at our components and any work features, we just select that tab. If we want to get to our iLogic information, we just select this tab, and now our rules that are inside of our model here are exposed. You'll see these other tabs right here called Forms, and as well Global Forms. So Forms, on this tab, these are forms that we develop inside of the file. They get stored inside of the file and they get transported with the file. So wherever the file is, that's where the form is going to be. We also have global forms, which are essentially external forms, just like external rules, where we go and develop these forms and then they get stored out on the network potentially. So that way a number of users can use the same forms for a level of consistency and standardization, okay? So go back here, back here to the Forms tab. I have a form that's already created. What this looks like, if I select this button, this form will pop up where I am then presented with the different parameters or variables or different buttons for me to be able to provide feedback to develop or initiate the configurator and to define the parameters of the configuration. What are the different variables needed in order for me to design the specific configuration in which I want? So I can go through here, and these are just drop-down boxes. These pick boxes here, these drop-down menus, are defined by how this form is created, as well as these buttons. They're defined by how this form is created. So just to kind of give you an example of what that is, if I right-click in my white space over here, I can add a form, or I can edit an existing form, okay? If I have a form from another file, I could do a copy and then paste it into this, this file right here, so I can reuse forms if necessary. But in order for me to add a form, all I have to do is right-click, select Add Form, and then I'm going to get this dialog box right here, the Form Editor dialog box. Along with that, I'm also going to get a visual sample of what that form is going to look like as I start building it up, okay? So in my form editor, I have a number of tabs here on the left-hand side. I have a toolbox in the lower left-hand corner. I have the main window pane here in the center, and then different properties around my form here in the lower window pane. If you at any time need any assistance or clarification as to what the form editor does, in the very lower left-hand corner, I have my help button. I could select that, which will then give me some help information about creating my different forms here, okay? So let's focus on these tabs here in the upper left-hand corner, where I can see the different parameters that I have associated inside of my model here. If I want to be able to easily edit or modify these parameters, all I need to do, I want to see them in my form. These are parameters that I've created from my parameter dialog box, different vital parameters that I can then use in order to initiate or configure my model here. So how this works, if I need a parameter, I want to show a parameter, all I need to do is select a parameter, just drag it over to the right-hand side, and then I'm going to see that parameter exposed right here. So the characteristics or the properties of the different parameters that I drag and drop over here are going to be shown in my form. So if I have a parameter that is a multi-value list, so if I created my parameter, it's of a multi-value list type, maybe of a text, those characteristics are going to be carried across. So pull material in my parameters dialog box is a multi-value list. And then you're going to see here in the form that it shows up as a multi-value list. I have a drop-down arrow. So whatever values I have in that multi-value list in the parameter, those are the values that are going to show up in my form. So they're directly correlated, okay? If I need to, I can add more parameters here. These other tabs, if I have a rule or if I have iProperties, I do the same thing. So if I want to trigger a rule, I want to initiate a rule from my form. Say, for instance, I want to do my clear components rule. All I need to do is drag that over here. It's going to show up in my upper window pane. In my form, it's going to be represented as a button. So it's basically a means to fire a rule at a particular time. I'm allowing the end user to define when that rule gets fired by a button click, okay? If I need to add iProperties, same concept, just go and look for any of the iProperties that I might have that are of any value, and I can just drag and drop them into place, like so. My toolbox in the lower left-hand corner here gives me some means to kind of organize and format my form in such a way that it makes it easier for the end user to be able to work with this information or digest this information. If I need to move anything around in my upper window pane here, I can just drag it and drop it. You know, I'm going to get a little a little arrow indicating how it's going to be positioned in my form, a green arrow indicating it's going to just swap and get located in that row. I can also, if I do something like this, just move things around where they're going to be above or below particular or other items here in my form. Okay, so very easy to move around. If I want to group anything together, I can grab a group from my toolbox. In my form, it's going to be grouped together, and then I can name these. So say I want to call these just rules. Whatever I type there, that's what's going to show up in my group box inside of my form here. And then I can nest different things underneath that or in that, let me get that in there. In that box. So by nesting them in there, like say some of these properties, if I nest that in there, then what I can do in my form, it allows me to then collapse or expand those items inside of my form. Just some usability for my end user, just to be able to use that information or move or work with that information a little bit easier. I can add different rows. If I want to add a picture to make it a little bit more customized, I can do things like that. Even add a splitter if I need to split up information, so that way kind of give me a means to be able to move things around and work with my form a little bit better. So say for instance I'm satisfied with this inside of this form inside of my rule editor. All I need to do is select OK here, and then I'm going to have my form inside of my forms in the form browser here. Whenever I want to initiate that form, simply select this form button. My form's going to come up. I can drag it around if I want to, select different things. My poll material, which is a multi-value list, I'm going to see that here as my multi-value list and make those selections. I can expand and collapse my different group box here, and then update my different properties. So a lot of different things that we can do inside of the form to easily present to our end users some way for them to make selections or provide feedback or answer questions. Okay, so that's the gist of the iLogic form editor. So if I go back here to my transmission line form, we're going to see how this thing works in action. So I can make my different selections here, update my configuration, which once again, if I select a button like that, what it's doing, it's firing a rule. That particular rule is going out and collecting different information from my resources that I need. And then I'm going to apply that configuration, which in turn will run another series of rules in order to initiate the process of bringing the files that are necessary, applying the logic to those files so that way they get appropriately configured here inside of my model. So basically what that does, it just initiates that command. It fires that rule for me to accomplish the process in which the logic defines. Okay. Now that I have that complete, I can go ahead and select done. And that now kind of envelops the whole process. So the UI, a means for us to ask questions and get feedback, then initiating the logic, utilizing the data resources, gathering all the files necessary from our parts pool, and then bringing it together as defined inside of the logic. Okay. So that's iLogic forms, very, very simple, but once again, as stated earlier, the button to initiate that here is inside of the file. If I was an end user and I was exposed to this, if I wanted to right click on and say edit, I could then edit it as an end user, or as you see, if I right click on there, I can also delete it. So in some situations, maybe that's not the best way to utilize forms, to have them exposed to the end users. So other ways that we can do that so they're not exposed, well, it's using Microsoft Visual Studio and developing your UIs inside of Visual Studio and then using them, basically connecting them to Inventor in order to make them available. Okay, so what does that look like? What do I need to do for that? So first, some of the things that we need to understand is Inventor, if we're going to use Microsoft Visual Studio, we're going to go through the process of developing a UI. There's some things that Inventor needs to understand first. And then basically what that comes down to being is on our tool tab inside of Inventor, you'll see we have a number of different panels here. And on the options panel, anytime you see one of the panel labels here with an arrow, if you select that arrow, it's going to expand open and you're going to get additional functionality. What we're going to pay attention to is this iLogic configuration. The advanced iLogic configuration allows us to define where Inventor is going to look out on our external directories for any external rules that might exist. Our external rules could be written in a number of different file formats. So the file extension, what are we looking for specifically in terms of our rule file extensions? But most importantly, in the context of this webinar, what we need to be aware of is the third option here is the iLogic Addin DLLs directory. So where does Inventor look for any DLLs that we might want to use within our Inventor application? By default, I believe this goes to the installation location where Inventor is loaded, and then there's an iLogic DLL folder inside of that installation bin folder. So obviously that's local to that machine. If you wanted to host all your DLLs externally, you wanted to put them out onto the network, this is where you would change that location, go ahead and then develop all your Windows forms, build out your DLLs, and then put the DLLs in whatever location you have defined here inside of Inventor. That way, whenever you fire that rule that's referencing that DLL, it's going to be able to find it. Okay. So referencing DLLs, what does that take? If I go over, I have another example here called Start Tool. And just to give you a little bit of background, I had a company that approached me that wanted to be able to consistently and rapidly develop file names. So they have a complex way in which they develop their file names, and it's based upon different selections from the end user in order to create that that Windows or that file name. So I came here, or I went to them, and I gathered a bunch of information and decided that maybe one of the best way to do a form in this environment was just kind of walk through the process, just ask a series of questions of the end user in order to acquire all the relative information to develop the file name for whatever they want to develop. Okay, so if I initiate this rule, this file name UI, and I'll show you what it is first before we drill down into it. So I'm going to run this rule, and my friends at Burns and Mac, Burns and McDonnell out of St. Louis, Missouri. I've worked with them, and this is their tool that I built for them. But it's really interesting in how we went through this process of creating a wizard to ask the different questions that are necessary. Okay, so whenever they fire up this this process, which quite honestly I have it set up as a triggered event. So as this is a template file that they use, so whenever they want to create a new file, they go to this template. Once they open up the template, it immediately triggers this rule. So this is the first thing that they're presented with every time that they create a new file. So they walk through this wizard and then ask them some questions like, please select the category of the file you're creating, whatever type of file. Then they select that, go to next, and then some other information, some input. So as I go through this process of asking questions and selecting next, it's building up the file name required for that particular component or assembly or whatever it is that they're trying to create. So I just go and make my selections. I have some different drop-down boxes here. I go through. So all these are the different requirements in order to build up their file name. And as I get to the point where the file name is now built up, I'm going to ask one last question of where would you like this file to be located? So anytime you create a new file, Inventor needs 2 bits of information. First, it needs to know what is the name of the file that you're creating, and of course, where are you going to store it? So we have to satisfy Inventor's needs in terms of developing this workflow. So I have the file name. I'm just going to browse out just onto my desktop, and I'm going to hit OK. And now it's going to then I select Finish. The last thing it's going to do is it's going to run a rule called Save Copy As, where it goes through the process of saving that template file with the new file name in the location in which I've defined. Okay, so if I go here to my model and I just go to my iProperties, this should show me exactly what I want to see. Here's the file name that I just derived through that process, and this is where it's stored at. So there's a million different ways that we can develop our UIs. And this was just based upon the requirements of how their process works. This just seemed like the best way in order to answer the questions, rather ask the questions and then get feedback from the end users in order to develop this file naming convention. So why would they want to do this? Obviously, previously this was all manual entry. Anytime there's manual entry, there's always the potentiality for somebody to make a mistake. So this alleviates that process. So there's a consistent way or a consistent means to develop file names. So that way, if we use downstream processes, if we use Vault, we want to do searches, it's always going to be consistent. It's always going to be the same. there's a high probability that you're going to find exactly what you're looking for based upon file name. So how does this work? What did I have to do in order to make this happen? Well, a couple of things. First, I have to go into Visual Studio, and I have to develop all the different windows. So this is what Visual Studio looks like. And I started a new project that just basically allowed me to go in and create different forms as necessary. So these are all the different forms. So you have to work within two environments basically inside of Visual Studio. First, you have to create the form itself. So from a visual perspective, you have to create the appearance of the form. And this is what I was talking about earlier in terms of all the different tools. When creating Windows forms, I can create different buttons and check boxes and list boxes and different data grids or group boxes. So I have a huge number of tools here in order to build out my Windows forms to provide the information to the end user, and of course then to be able to ask those questions. So I can tab different things if I want to create a tab control or a progress bar. So if Inventor has to do some processing, or rather if Visual Studio has to do some processing, we can display a progress bar for our end user. So a large host of different tools that I can incorporate into my Windows forms. So once you have the Windows form built out, then what you need to do is you need to apply control to it. What does the cancel button do? What does the next button do? You know, if I have a Windows form like selection set, these are pick boxes and text boxes. What do each one of these do? So I have to develop the control for these forms as well. Okay. So how do I do that? If I'm looking at the design, so up here in Visual Studio, I have the design tab. If I simply go to the design tab, and if I want to edit the control of this particular form, I just simply double click on it and double click here, and it's going to take me to the actual Visual Basic code behind the form that controls it. So I have different subroutines available here, and these subroutines are basically broken down based upon the either the button or the text box or anything like that. So you'll see that the labels for these subroutines coincide or correlate to the different things that are involved within my form. Like what happens when the form first loads. So I have a routine that handles this form upon load. Well, upon load in this particular instance, I'm locating the button. So I have a button called Next, and I'm locating it at these pixels. I'm setting different pick boxes with their values, multi-value lists. So I'm defining the list here upon load, and then I'm looking for different conditions. So if a variable is of a particular value, then I'm going to do something like preview inside of a text box to do something. So I have controls involved with when the form first loads. I also have controls that look for things like when a text box changes. So if this text box, or actually this is a CBX, so it's a combo box, if the combo box, if the index has changed within that combo box, then do something. So a lot of conditional type of expressions involved with the controls for my form. If I click the back button, what does it do? Well, this is the control to handle if I click the back button. I'm going to do these things. So it's not only just, you know, developing the form itself, but also adding the control to what the form actually does. So inside of the iLogic forms, that's handled for us. That's why it's limited. You can only do so much. You know, if there's a either the different items within the form are associated to parameters, then it can do only whatever the parameter definition is. If it's associated to a rule, you're only going to get a button to trigger that rule. So a lot more functionality inside of Visual Studio. Once you have your Visual Studio forms, it could be one form or multiple forms. Once you have them built out, then what you need to do is you need to do a build. You have to compile all the information and you need to build it out so that way it produces the necessary files for Inventor. And primarily that's a DLL. A DLL is a dynamic link library. Anytime that you produce or build out a Windows form type of project, you're going to get a DLL, and it's going to get stored out wherever the solution is being saved. So essentially what you need to do, you can do a couple of things here. If you go into the properties inside of Visual Studio, you can define where it gets compiled. So right now, this is just getting compiled in the native location in which I have the stored, but you can control that. So if you have inside of Inventor, you've defined where those DLLs are Inventor's looking for those DLLs, and you have a centralized path out on the network, you can change that build path here to be the same path as where Inventor's looking for those DLLs. So as you build these projects, the DLL will then get pushed out to that location, so that way there's no other manual entry or manual activity that needs to happen. You can just update your project in Visual Studio, go ahead and build, and then the DLL will be available for Inventor to use. So just some little tips and tricks there if you're using Visual Studio to be aware of. Once you have that DLL output, then what you're going to do, if it's not in the location in which Inventor is looking for those DLLs, then what you need to do is you need to make sure that you are putting those DLLs where Inventor's looking for them. So in my case, I have on my D drive, I have an iLogic DLL folder. So this is where the DLL is located at. I have my Burns & Mac file generator DLL right there, okay? So I've used Visual Studio, I've developed my form, I've built it out, I now have a DLL, it's in the location in which Inventor's looking for it. One last step is we need to reference it. We need to have some sort of mechanism to reference that DLL, to basically open it up. I have it out there, but when do I open it up? When is it presented to the end user? And that is done through a rule. In this case, in this example, what I have here, it's done within a rule. So if I open up this file name UI rule, we're going to see some very specific formatting that has to happen in order for Inventor to load up this DLL into Inventor, so that way it works. And that primary thing is right here, this first line. I need to add a reference to that DLL. Where is the DLL? It's in where Inventor's looking for it. If I wanted to hard code a path, I could. So I could do the fully qualified name and path. I could write that out here, or I can rely on Inventor's configuration to understand where that DLL is at. Once I have that referenced, then there's a couple of things here that I need to do in this main subroutine here to initiate it. So that's what this using is. So this using loop here basically says I'm going to start up a new UI using this form inside of the DLL as so it's going to launch it, basically just launch it up inside of Inventor, and then it's going to make some associations to some variables and some parameters here inside of Inventor, and then once I hit OK, then it's going to close. So that's what this VB OK is. So if I hit OK, then it's going to close the form and then update my model. That's the last step right here. How do I know this format? How do I know that I need to write this? Well, there's comes with experience. You can, when you practice enough, obviously being behind the tube, you can understand this. But most importantly, if this is your first time, you've never done this before, how do I know that I need this format? Fortunate enough for us, the developers for iLogic created a wizard for this very task. So let me walk you through that. So I'm going to start a new rule, and I'm just not going to give this any specific name, But if I go to my wizard, so it's a brand new clean rule. If I go to my wizards, I want to create a rule for a dialog. That's my first wizard button right here. If I select that, it's going to ask me a couple different things here. Where is the DLL? So I know my DLLs on my D drive, iLogic DLL. It's going to be the Burns and Mac file name generator. If I select open, then I'm going to get this dialog box. And it's going to say just some different things for me to be able to select to create this rule. So I know the DLL is of this name. I'm going to want to open up the welcome screen. I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to create the rule for me. So I didn't have to understand any of the formatting. I didn't have to do anything else. All I needed to do was just run that wizard, point to the DLL, and the wizard will create the code for me. So if I select save here and run, you see it picked up the DLL, it ran the rule for me, it then loaded up the DLL and now presented me the form. So I didn't have to do anything additional in terms of formatting that rule or anything else. The wizard handles it for me, okay? So anytime I want to run that, all I need to do is just run this rule, and then that's what's going to initiate my form there. Earlier I had stated something about events triggers. So if you have a rule that then fires up the UI, I can associate that to an event trigger by saying this document, I want to open up my user interface, or after open document, maybe I want to add to that, then I would just add that under that particular event, that rule, and then at that event, it's going to trigger that rule and then present my UI. So very clean process if you leverage all the different tools and the power of Inventor to present your end users these UIs. So that's iLogic forms. That's Windows forms using Visual Studio. The last thing that I want to show you, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but it was something that I had stated in the beginning of the webinar pertaining to Addins. Now, there's a lot of companies out there that, you know, we kind of just ad hoc our automation and we just want to get things rolling. But there's also a lot of companies out there that want to streamline things. They want to incorporate their automation into Inventor itself, okay? You don't want to have to go and select, you know, go to my iLogic browser and initiate a rule in order to get a form or anything like that. You want it nice and clean. You want it all organized. You want it all kind of synchronized and have a decent workflow. Well, what you can do is if I go through here, I'm going to open up actually, I'm just going to start a new assembly here. And when I do that, I want you to pay attention here. The last thing that you can do in terms of initiating forms is to create an add-in, an Inventor add-in. And what an add-in allows us to do is we can place buttons on our ribbon, okay? So I created an add-in and it's inside of my Inventor session. If I go to on my Tools tab and go to Add-ins, I have this add-in I created called Inventor Add-in 1. And it's loaded right now. And because the fact that it loads, add-ins load when you start up Inventor, you don't have to worry about creating connections to DLLs or creating rules to connect to DLLs to show your forms or anything like that. It's automatically there. It's built into Inventor. It's very stable. Nobody can access it. It's not exposed. So it's a very clean, robust, secure way of being able to create a means to start up automation. So I have on my Assemble tab, I have this configurators panel that I created, and I have a button that I created called LSC, and basically it loads whenever I fire up Inventor. If I want my UI to come up, I just select that button and boom, now I have a UI that I created for a class that I'm giving at AU this year for specifically about Inventor automation and talking about the different aspects of it. So anybody that might be attending AU 2017 in Las Vegas this year, look for me, Tom Fitzgerald. I have an inventor automation class. Please sign up, and I'm going to go into a lot deeper mechanisms and functionality in terms of inventor automation. But basically, that is it. You know, I created an add-in using Visual Studio, and just to kind of give you a little bit of a highlight there, what that means is if I close my solution here, I can go and if I create a new project, one of the things I can do when I create a new project underneath templates, Visual Basic right here, if I scroll all the way down, I have an Inventor 2017 add-in project or an Inventor 2018 add-in project. So this is a template that if I would select this, it gives me the basic format that I need to create an Inventor add-in. Build the solution, load the add-in inside of Inventor. Now, anytime I fire up Inventor, I have the add-in, I have the button on the panel, and it's nice and clean and streamlined and incorporated into my session of Inventor. So there is a lot of information out on the web pertaining to developing these add-ins. I could spend an entire hour just talking about how to go about this business of creating an Inventor add-in, but just understand that there is a lot of functionality there involved with Autodesk Inventor as well as Microsoft Visual Studio to alleviate and kind of expedite the process of creating different add-ins. So that way you too can have an add-in inside of an Inventor session with a button and kind of make that process a whole lot easier. Nice and clean, very robust, very secure. So appreciate everybody who's been involved with these webinars. And so Nigel, that is all I have for right now.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you again, Tom, for being with us for, I guess, the 5th time. I know we spent a lot of time offline too talking about this, so it's not just presenting time and stuff. So again, thank you for that. Let's go ahead and see what we've got here. We've got a couple of questions, but definitely before we jump into questions, real quick, like Thomas mentioned, he does have a class at AU this year, and what that is that's Autodesk University. If you want more information on AU, definitely just Google Autodesk University. You'll be able to find it. It's like a convention/training extravaganza. I guess it's one way to explain it. Thomas, do you have anything else to add about AU?
AU, yeah. So Autodesk University, roughly 8,000 to 10,000 individuals from all over the world fly in, and they kind of fall into Las Vegas in November. So November 13th, 14th, and 15th this year. And there's just hundreds and hundreds of different sessions from both Autodesk employees as well as companies that have embraced and use Autodesk products, all the different products. So manufacturing, architectural, civil, geospatial, VR, AR, media and entertainment. So all sorts of different classes, demonstrations, and all these different means for anybody to get real honest and straightforward and compelling information about how to use the Autodesk product. So if you have an opportunity to go, it's a great time. Like I said, thousands of like-minded individuals all gathering together in Las Vegas in order to you know, kind of pump up the whole Autodesk mantra of, you know, let's get things done. Let's learn how to do things better. So yes, if you get a chance to get out there, please, it's a great time. It is definitely worth the money. A lot to learn, a lot of networking, a lot of communicating with other people and solving problems and really building up that motivation.
Yep, definitely. And if you are going to go, definitely sign up for Tom's class. He'll be there. There might be some KETIV employees there too, so I'll be on the lookout. I'm sure the KETIVers will be wearing KETIV shirts, similar to like the one I'm wearing right now. So definitely don't be shy if you see anybody. Yeah, that's the gist of it. So let's see here. In addition to AU, if you know you can't make it to Las Vegas in November there. KETIV does have classes for iLogic as well. They could be catered to. We have an iLogic Basics course. We also do have courses catered to that we can cater to your company based on your needs. So definitely, if you're interested in something like that, let us know. If you want more information on AU as well, let me know. And I could forward you web pages and stuff like that for AU. Let's see here. There's a couple of comments in here, Tom, where people are a little jealous of your forms in regards to them looking much nicer than theirs. So just wanted to let you know about that. While we're going through here, here's a good question. Is it possible to make copy design possible with an iLogic rule? So I think we're talking about copy design specifically in Vault, Tom.
Oh, no. There is no communication between iLogic and Vault. So that would specifically leverage the Vault API if copy design is even exposed in the Vault API, which it may not be. So that, no, there's no way to do that inside of iLogic, inside of the Vault. Now, that isn't to suggest that that's something that couldn't be managed outside of Vault. There most certainly is the potentiality of being able to, we could collect information from the Vault, basically check out or download files from the Vault and then leverage Inventor to do a copy design of some nature using iLogic. But Vault copy design, very, very strong tool. To recreate the wheel, so to speak, and try to do that outside of Vault using Inventor and iLogic, I think that would be, a lot more work than what is truly necessary to accomplish that. But certainly something to ask the Vault guys to see if if it's exposed in the API, and if so, how is that handled? Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I believe the question's been asked before. So maybe some of the other some of the other AEs here at KETIV probably know the answer to that, whether or not it's even possible. I'm sure it is, but it depends on if it, like Thomas said, if it's exposed in the API and is, able to be leveraged in that sense. Let's go ahead and take a look here. In the iLogic UI editor, when I create a button for my rule, I cannot use the ampersand symbol when editing the label for the button. The ampersand symbol does not show up. Let's see. Any comments on that, Tom?
I would say that only certain special characters are acceptable for that. And most of the time when special characters aren't accepted for names, and that's because it might be used in the code base for other activities or other things. So I would say that the developer specifically left out ampersand because it may conflict with something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd assume that it probably has, like Thomas said, something else with the coding uses ampersand specifically that is not letting you do it. I guess you're just gonna have to type A and D, which is kind of unfortunate if you want to save keystrokes there. Let's see here. Creating add-ins is something we need. Is Autodesk University something we should look for in order to learn how to create add-ins? Tom, you want to take that one?
I know my class, we're going to be talking about it briefly, but not like a deep dive into add-ins specifically. But like I said before, there are a large number of resources out there on the internet as to that process. Yep. I know that Brian Eakins, he's an Autodesk employee, had worked extensively in developing the Inventor API, and he has some videos out there about going through that process of creating an Inventor project inside of Visual Studio for an add-in, and then what it takes in order to manipulate that template in order for it to work within your particular environment. I am not opposed to potentially doing a webinar, Nigel, about that. It's really not too complicated, but there are some things that certainly need to be taken into consideration in order to make that happen.
Definitely, for sure, and we'll keep you updated. Thanks again, Thomas. Yeah, and definitely, George, go ahead and let us know if that's something you're really interested in. It looks like I'll just have somebody follow up with you after the fact, and we can talk to you about some of that those add-in needs. We might be able to help in that regard. I have someone in mind who might be able to help you out. So, let's see here. what is the cost of the iLogic course? So that might be relating to AU there, Tom. So the iLogic course is, you can't just take one course at AU. Well, I mean, I guess you could take one course at AU, but you register for the whole event, and then you can go do a number of classes. So it's not like you sign up per class. So that's for AU specifically. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Tom.
No, you're right. I see it more like, think of it as a mall. You buy basically the ticket to get into the mall. You're getting into AU, and once you're in there, you can go to anything. You can sign up for any class, regardless of the fact that it's something of your discipline or not. Yep. I mean, everything is available for you. You just have to go in there, and there's multiple classes that are being held at the same time throughout the day. Yep. So it's just everywhere. It's just crazy. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's like Autodesk Disneyland, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah,
you just pay for the ticket in, and you can do whatever you want.
Whatever you want.
Exactly. So if you need more information on AU, like I mentioned, go ahead and let me know. If you are interested in specifically an iLogic course and AU might not be something you can attend, I know that's a couple of days in November in Las Vegas. That's not feasible for some people. Let us know, and we can go ahead and see if we can schedule an iLogic class for you based on your particular needs. We do have instructors on board here at KETIV as well that can help you out with that specific topic, as well as anything else pretty much. We do have, I think, over 40 catalog courses that are just standard, and then we do custom training as well for people. So let us know if you have any needs, we can take care of that for you. Let's see here. This question comes up pretty much every time that we do a webcast in regards to iLogic. In regards to the code, Thomas, what can you share? What can't you share with people watching?
Actually, what I covered today, there isn't anything that I can truly share as is. But if there are any questions that anybody has, feel free, reach out to Nigel and team. And if it's something that they cannot directly or immediately answer, they communicate with me, and we can come up with the answer and make sure that you get the information you need.
Yeah, definitely. So unfortunately, a lot of the data sets that we're showing, even with the other webcasts that we have as well, is proprietary information. We can't really share a lot of that. We've been, like, I'm sure Thomas has worked numerous, if not hundreds, if not thousands of hours on a lot of that code. And it's definitely for a particular customer. Same with some of the code that we show as well. But we figured that it was going to be a problem a couple of months ago when we started hosting more of these iLogic webcasts. So people at KETIV have started to generate sample code for particular functionality. So if you're looking for anything in particular, let us know. We do have a library that is constantly growing of sample code to complete certain tasks. And if you're interested in something like that, let someone here at KETIV know. There is a nominal charge for something like that. But if that's something you really need, we're here to help. So for example, things like the generative design iLogic video that Jonathan Creek did a couple months ago, that code is available as part of that library as well. So with that, I think that's everything. Do you have anything else to add, Tom?
No, I'm good to go, Nigel. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone on the call. I really appreciate everybody's attendance over these last few months pertaining to this, and I'm hoping that we can have some more in the future. And if so, please stay tuned.
Yeah, definitely. Let me know in the post-webinar survey if this is something you want to see more of. If we do see a need for it, we'll definitely make it happen. If it's Thomas, if it's one of us here at KETIV, I'm doing more automation webcasts. I know Thomas is a very busy guy, so definitely thankful that he's been here the last couple of months for us. So with that, I'll let you all go. We'll see you all next week for an introduction in what's new in both the product design and manufacturing collection, as well as the architecture, engineering, construction collections. There have been a couple of things being added over the last couple of months. Definitely stay tuned for those. And with that, you know nothing, Jon Snow.